This is Goldman, the Lost Evangelist, feedback looper, and host of this podcast, Walking the Talk and Talking the Walk. Today, in a special edition of Sermon from the Mountain, I'm here today to present you with some new stuff. In fact, it's a campaign. I am the alternative candidate. I will be presenting in a different dimension on this procedure that inevitably I'm part of. This year, 2024, it's going to be a year with 76 elections. And 76 elections around the world. So things are happening, not just at the local level, but it's a game theory exercise to see what's the global narrative about and how is the status quo, resisting change for what's called status quo bias. If you're doing okay, you have little things to risk. You just want to keep what you got, what you have. And that's fair enough. That's what conservatives love. They love what they have. They've accumulated throughout their history, throughout their lives, the well-being of society as we know it. And there's very little challenge to assuming that you can risk your position. Like the royal family in the UK or the Commonwealth or England. Right? Why would they risk things through a bad communication strategy and Photoshop? Well, who knows? Who knows? But I really don't care. I think they're all wonkus. And still, there's the tradition and the whole thing that represents, an old nation like the one I inhabit. The kingdom. An all kingdoms tradition. And we should be fair to acknowledge the relevance of these kingdoms around the history of the world. And we do what we can as humble servants to mind our own business and, keep walking. And this is what I do. I walk the talk and talk the walk. And I do this bonding with nature and several, secret places from my own sacred mountain. It's all intertwined between the colonialist narrative of how we got here and this new circumstance of an interconnected internet society, let's call it, in which we are closer than ever and yet our psyche, our mental health is soaring because we think what we are projecting represents who we are, and who we are is who is behind the camera, not when we're delivering a speech for a political campaign or an internet campaign. At the end, in this interconnected world, we're all brands that are trying to collaborate among each other to, you know, tell a story. What else? And the way in which we come out depends on how you trust what we are saying, what we're doing. You want a proof of concept. And this is what I'm trying to deliver now. It's all blah, blah, blah. Any way you see it. So if it's all blah, 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 like, you know, Thunberg pointed out, what if we quit the blah, blah, blah and try to scope what is the vision of a transformative movement that takes us closer to what this new society should look like? So I have a plan for that, and it's called New. So I'm going to test it on this election because I'm going to put it on top of a real life democratic process, but that dissolves the boundaries of who gets to decide about this proposal in particular, because this proposal is going to be projected to the entire transformed Gaia. New Gaia, I will call it. And this new Gaia is this new social ecosystem in which you and I are part of. You as an individual, I as an individual, but certainly in the outermost layer of, you know, this representation game, this affiliation game, if you would like to call it, there is a global understanding of resilience and the holistic nature of this desired, more equitable and fair dimension of the tiny blue dot that we are once we look from outside our perimeter. And you know, I'm just quoting Ramon in terms of the way in which ecosystems relate to each other. You know, which are the actors? What is this boundaries? What are the rules of interaction? What's happening on the boundaries? Margalef, but also Maspons. And this is part of the narrative that I'm here to present in a way in which we can collectively build what we desire to achieve in the long run. If we go beyond this sort of limited vision that campaigns are, you know, sort of scoped in, and this limited vision in which states and regions are also scoped in. But at the meantime, I'd like to point out that this is also truth and important for the relevance of the local construction of the health innovation ecosystem in Catalonia, which I'm part of and which I will evangelize to you, because it's part of the new perspective in which in my work I have been privileged to work with, and with an exceptional innovation and foresight unit led by Ramon Maspons and Rosana Alessandrello, in which, to me, I consider the greatest privilege was just to have, good leadership, good bosses that can, help you create value, which is what we are trying to do, both in our unit, both as individuals, both as an institution, Aquas, which is a public body that depends of the Department of Health of Catalonia, and the public insurer, the public payer, which is Catsalud. So we're part of this health innovation ecosystem, and we're also an actor that's playing a role in Europe through the adoption of demand-driven vehicles, funding vehicles, mechanisms that allow for the adoption of innovation based on the unmet needs that we have as public health systems, which represent, our society as a whole. And if we're able to do the work of co-creating and collaborating beforehand, but then intertwining with the economic operators to bring value, this is when it becomes an interesting new game. And we're all evangelists in our unit, but there are also several actors working in similar paths, and we're all evangelizing the same thing. We have to mainstream this demand-driven use policy at different levels throughout Europe, and we have to lay the ground of how we're going to do this and how we're going to interact among different projects and different initiatives, trying to find common bonds, alignment, synergies. And, once I am ready to come out and deliver this message, which indeed has a political statement, I will keep doing what I do, as a public servant. I will present myself as a creator, as an artist, independently of what's happening here. And then I will present this new state of nature at the outbound of this collective social complex system, in which the boundaries have been brought down, and that interconnects everyone around the globe. And this is why I'm making this campaign in a new language, which I've made up for the purpose of acknowledging new things. But it's also a trap, it's also a trick. It's not really a new language. I'm just going to use the union as of the sum of different languages in which will help me deliver this message to different people that speak this language. And I need to be able to, find a common understanding beyond this little tiny ecosystem that I inhabit. Because this is what we want. We want a more equitable, resilient society. Not just for ourselves here, not through excluding mechanisms, but rather by opening up the perspective in which we are ready to interact, both at local level and in a global perspective. And this is what's going to come out from the value proposition of my campaign, which just starts at this label, 0, which will be represented through a new head. And this new head is going to pound against the status quo, which is represented by 8 other political parties that represent the heterogeneity of this election, of this place, this culture, this new nation that evolves from the previous mental construction and also formal construction of what used to be what we had. And don't get me wrong, but this message might seem very similar to what the other campaigns are saying, or it might help them put the focus on the things that I'm sharing in a way in which, if we can collectively have an impact on each other's debate, then we can also maybe come to the conclusion that what's happening outside, it's as important as what's happening inside. And that somehow we have to recognize that there is this continuous conflict against antagonists. Because antagonism is where we live. We love to hate our antagonist. And this represents a first step of a recognition of the status quo, which is dualism. But at least in dualism, we acknowledge that we have departed from unitarianism, which also represents our individual subjectiveness. In this first state of leaping out from ourselves, from our current status quo, and from our current mindset that somehow has the security of our surrounding, and in the way in which we live, the way in which we're ready to proceed. So, what is this guy talking about? I don't know, Bill. I don't know. But the truth is, I do. I've been preparing for this for a long time. I have a recollection of 9 elections in which I didn't participate actively, but I was preparing this performative art initiative. So I played along, all by myself, what it would take to walk the talk and talk the walk during a political campaign period. So, there's going to be 3 political campaigns happening in my surrounding ecosystems where I might have something to say. And I'm going to come out and say it. We have the Basque Country election, the Catalan election, and the European election. Yet I have one campaign. So now we have a trinity and unity, antagonizing. Okay? And this is how combinations of 1 and all up to 9 will give us these interactions among dualities that are battling each other through this competitive narrative of values that tell us that we need to be competing against each other. That's bullshit. That's part of the violent narrative behind the need of war and violence that's been fed through tradition, through the conservative tradition of warfare, which is through a patriarchy at its best, because it represents part of the representation or the structure, the framework of what a good family, that being interpreted from coming from a long trait of generations that have built wherever it is that you're from, and that have rang the recognition of being part of grandes of your place, right? I'm neither of those, but that is the royalty history, the bourgeois history in terms of, industrial revolution, how that took place and how that changed society. And how all those elements brought good fair amount of fairness and equality, of social living, of more people than before, than feudalism, let's say. And, part of what's the representation of the Crusades and all this the mix between faith and war to regain territories because of fighting somebody else's, in political and colonial terms, have led to this misguided interpretation of our own history and the references and cross values that through knowledge, science, and cultural interchanges brings us to where we're at. So it's a rich history of humankind that has allowed us to get here. And if you think about the latter stages of our 20th century, after the world wars, we again had the dualism of the Iron Wall and the two sides of the winning parties of World War II, the communists and the capitalists. And we have bought into that for the last 60 years through this cultural globalization of a narrative that we've learned to accept. Also through the interrelations that our governments, in each one of our cases, in a singular perspective, have dealt with to provide value for themselves or their population in terms and ways that have just mimicked the patron's desires. Take Nixon lobbying for banning, marijuana, for example. And how had that led to, a whole bunch of countries reaching out to some conservative interest that is now, when it becomes an economical nature, then becomes a blurry narrative that has just been tried to keep some sort of people under control through a social conservative vision that either through Anglican church style, Central Europe, Anglican, American, some Catholic perspective of its own, conservative, business-driven, education-based ecosystem, but it's also quite relevant in terms of the model in which the Spanish New Spain as a virreinato, represented a whole political structure that was not based on colonies. Colonies are what happened in the U.S. But here, something else happened, which also has that element of Roman history pounding and building upon something that was resilient urban living, in a valley full of canals and a lake that was, handled in an urbanistic manner that dried up a lake. Now we're in a drought, and Mexico City is lacking water. Yet it was built on top of a lake. So the utilitarianism of a 1 million capital of the world that was somehow in harmony with its surrounding has been terribly represented by the violence that intrinsically came from their own war-loving structure of power that Spanish historians, ecologists, are not able to grasp the contradiction of just banning everything that comes from that ancient culture. And we have the cynicism to say that ever since the Europeans came there, Spanish first, the rest of Europe later, those places were just back into dark ages of tribalism, which is entirely false. Yet, none of us at this present moment in time are free to judge, to throw the first stone. Because we're not free from that sin. And we're also sons and daughters of those circumstances. In this global world, every element of both colonialism or that royal virreinato that sort of expansionism, let's call it, if colonialism does not fit your practical term, it had some consequences. It had some extraction elements. It had some urbanistic, fantastic building of new settlings, new models that are disregarded completely in the Spanish education system entirely. You have no recollection of encomiendas, no recollection of haciendas, no recollection of what happened in the New Spain. In our own current education system, because you're still trying to play that you were the good guy. And that is still a narrow-minded way to interpret in which side of history you would place at any given moment in the past. And that goes for the other opposite version, let's say the indigenous version, with only one thing that we should consider, which is how the social relationships of those people, let's call them the brown people, have in terms of how this white Spanish people came together and built this society in terms of what they believed was fair, this transfer of their own creed so that it would mix with the holy mountains, and the other gods that, might have some appropriation from the past, from the Egyptians, maybe, even Christianity. The Sumerians. They build the pyramids and then they're all over the place, have the same structures and all of that. And somehow our Catholic parties are always linked with the Son, the Father Son, who we can acknowledge now as Father God, and I, his Son. Chan chan! Do you believe that? This guy is saying he's Jesus' bro. I'm Jay's bro. Goldman. So I've been sent here to sort of send the last testament. So I am the last evangelist. I'm also the lost evangelist. Because from my human perspective, let me tell you, I'm lost. And I'm not running into despair just yet. But very, very well be. If you don't start, recognizing what the Son, Godfather, has sent me here, as a covenant, a new covenant that is unleashed right before your eyes. in the only possible way a future son of God could embrace in terms of how are we going to represent what's happened in the past and how from this day on a new cycle begins. Amazing, we're in a transformational era and we need new narratives, including the narratives of the past that somehow, hold the policies that we need in order to, reach our more holistic and resilient outcomes as a society. Gaia, we have one planet. And we were able to see this when those first pictures from Earth, from outer space, showed us this blue thing that we had never seen before. God damn it, it was blue. How could we have guessed that? And that then brought all this crazy expenditure and the spatial, race between two heteropatriarch males, represented by institutions that were representing just that. And still are playing war games in the sky. And somehow we're still sort of facing this comic book unleash of this male heteropatriarch narrative that we don't fucking have to buy into. Look at Robert Downey Jr. He wants out of the Marvel world because he's been encapsulated into this role that represents the hierarchy of this simplistic, armamentistic, war-loving techno-structure of this futuristic end of technology and the social consequences of some science fiction, pseudo philosophical, mystical emergence through the entire multiverse in which that exists, which is just fine. Let it be. I'm just talking about multiverses here, and we need to be able to envision our own rather than let good old suck try to get us into their metaverse when they've already shown, and the commission, just like the commission on cigarettes 40 years ago, shown in front of the people that have been affected. But the algorithms that have perpetuated young kids getting hooked into social media in ways in which it has affected their mental health. Was that Suck's desire and goal? Maybe not, but he played those cards. All of them did. He turned around and said, I'm truly sorry for what happened. A little bit like the king saying, it's not going to happen again. I think I fucked up by hunting elephants. This is what kings do. This is what Starks, Zuckerbergs do. Yet, on that Marvel story, they are saving the world. So they look at themselves as people who are bringing the future now. In terms in which, oh, that is aspiring because they got to do something quite complicated. And they had the technological tools to produce them from scratch. An idea that did not exist. So we got to give those people credit. And I, in fact, played that game and lost. I did not make it through. I did not make it through the beta. And I wasn't able to fake it till I made it. I didn't make it. But the vision I had, it's intact in terms of what we had to do. And I never shared it, not openly the way I will do it now. Because I needed to be able to safeguard what I thought was my treasure, right? So somehow my story, it's a failed story as well. But it also represents the only story that has brought me to this place to be ready to commend this new journey. And in this journey, I have a background, I have a job, I'm a public servant as well. So I'm locked in as well. And I have to put it out there to be able to understand if what I do, both on my job and both in the vision that I've had for a long time, that I'm not able to crystallize, is now put into the hands of the Tico Commons, which is my consideration of a new commons, which you can call new commons or you can call whichever way you like, because in your own multiverse, which we all have the right to scope and shape in any way we want, you got to be able to do that. So bear with me on my own narrative. But the terms in which I've defined it, some elements in my own narrative, are built to try to find the bridges and collaboration among each other. And that's why I'm a futurist. I'm a foresighter. I am an evangelist. Because I know I've chosen the complicated path through complexity. But that's my doom. That's what I do. And I will simplify that in terms of the actions that are going to happen in this 99 days, starting from today. And in this 99 days, my campaign, regardless of what's happening in the vast country, what's happening in Catalonia, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the US, what's happening in Mexico, I will link myself to 9 of those campaigns and say, these are my 9 elections that I will run through. And I've just got this one campaign. That's going to last 99 days. And then you will be able to follow in little bits and pieces, or in a holistic new narrative that involves you in ways in which you still have not imagined, but that somehow will interconnect with your own vision, with your own journey, with your own life. Because it must, in order for this new mechanism at the local level of our brain to interconnect the two sides of it, the right hemisphere with the left hemisphere. So all of this, as you see this video, is happening in your head. I'm just a medium. I'm just new medium. I'm just another candidate, another artist, another performer. But I have this one impact variable, one KPI, and it's a word. So it's a literary revolution as well. Because in one word is comprised the entire meaning of reaching that moment in space and time in which we all can commute to this emergence and emergent resilience that leaves in an eternal motion that you can connect with by speaking the word out loud. So repeat after me. Alls.